Spring, 1945. The Apennine Mountains. The Gothic line, that fortress of concrete and granite, was beginning to crack. The Brazilian Expeditionary Force, the FEB, was on the offensive, pushing the exhausted but still lethal German divisions north. But this was not a war of open fields. It was a war of narrow roads, hairpin turns, and sheer, muddy inclines. And in this vertical hell, the king of the battlefield was not the infantryman, but the panzer. Even in retreat, the Germans were masters of a single Panzer IV, or worse, a Panther, emerging from the morning fog, could halt an entire battalion. It was a 50-ton steel ghost that was immune to rifles, immune to machine guns, and whose 75mm cannon could turn a Brazilian Sherman tank into a flaming coffin. For the infantry, the sound of approaching tank treads was the sound of certain death. Against this iron terror, the Prasinhas had only one reliable shield. It wasn't a tank, it was a cannon. The American-built M157mm anti-tank gun. It was a low-profile, long-barreled, high-velocity weapon that, with the right crew and the right ammunition, could punch a hole clean through the side armor of a Panther. It was the infantry's mortar tank, their tank killer. It was their only defense. Having one of these guns meant you held the road. Losing it meant you were already dead. This is the story of one of those guns. It was positioned to defend a critical crossroads near the town of Manaus. A platoon of Brazilian infantry was dug in, their entire flank protected by this single, vital cannon. And guarding the cannon was its high priest, a sergeant we will call Antunes. Antunes was not an ordnance engineer from a university. He was not a weapons designer. Back in Brazil, he was a mecânico de caminho, a truck mechanic from the industrial suburbs of São Paulo. He was a fucador, a tinkerer, a man who had spent his entire life fixing things that should have been thrown away. He understood the soul of broken machinery. He could fix a cracked engine block with nothing but a welder and pure stubbornness. He was the guardian angel of the platoon's non-functional jeeps, the man who kept their single radio running, and the chief mechanic of their motor tank. The day before, the crossroads had been hell. A German Nebelwerfer Barazda, terrifying, screaming, rocket mortar had blanketed their position. The Brazilians huddled in their foxholes as the world exploded. When the smoke cleared, the men were shaken, but alive. But the gun was wounded. A piece of shrapnel, white-hot and jagged, had torn through the gun's protective shield and struck the heart of its mechanism. It didn't hit the barrel. It hit the traversing mechanism, the complex, delicate gearbox that allowed the crew to turn the cannon left and right. The iron housing was shattered. The main traversing gear, the coroa, was cracked, half of its teeth sheared off. The gun crew tried to move it. Nothing. It was stuck, pointing uselessly at a patch of empty mud, 30 degrees to the left. It could fire, yes, but it could not aim. It was a cannon frozen in place. The platoon lieutenant, seeing the damage, felt his blood run cold. Their shield was broken. He got on the radio. Gun 1 is disabled. Traversing mechanism destroyed. Impossible to repair in field. Requesting retrieval. The answer from battalion headquarters was grim and predictable. Negative. The road is a sea of mud under direct enemy observation. Retrieval is impossible. A long, terrible pause. Standard doctrine: if it cannot be retrieved, it must be destroyed. Deny it to the enemy. Demolish the gun and fall back to the secondary line. Fall back meant abandoning the crossroads. Abandoning the crossroads meant giving the Germans a free highway to roll their panzers straight into the Brazilian flank. Cutting off the entire regiment. To destroy the gun was to admit defeat. The lieutenant hung up the radio. He looked at his men. Preparem as cargas de demolição, prepare the demolition charges. But Sergeant Antunes, the mechanic, was on his knees in the mud, wiping grease and blood from the shattered gear housing. He ran his calloused fingers over the broken teeth of the gear. He was not a soldier. He was a mechanic looking at a broken machine. And to him, impossible was just a word for a job that took longer. He stood up. He looked at his lieutenant. Com licença, meu tenente, não destrua a arma. Do not destroy the gun. The lieutenant was exasperated. Sergeant 2, you heard the order. It's finished. Now, Tenant, Antunes said, his voice quiet but firm. He pointed not at the gun, but at a pile of smoking rubble 200 meters away. It was a bombed-out Italian farmhouse. Lying half buried in the debris, upside down and rusting, was the carcass of an old farm machine. Acho que vi trator. I think I saw a tractor. The lieutenant stared at him. A tractor? What in God's name are you talking about? Trator, sim, Antunes said, his eyes already calculating. Fiat. Acho que posso consertar. A Fiat tractor. I think I can fix it. The lieutenant, a man at the absolute end of his rope, stared at Antunes as if he had just started speaking in tongues. Trator, sargento. Estamos no meio de ataque. O inimigo está a 500 metros. E você está falando de tratores? He was seconds away from ordering Antunes to be gagged and bound. This was madness. Você está louco? Pegue as cargas de demolição. É uma ordem. Get the demolition charges. That is an order. But Antunes did not move. He was a mechanic. He was not wired for blind obedience. He was wired to solve problems. He held up a greasy, calloused hand, not in defiance, but in a plea for logic. No, tenente, escuta, he said, his voice dropping, becoming intense. The voice of a man explaining a complex diagnosis. Eu não quero eu quero a engrenagem. O trator é Fiat, 702 talvez. É velho, mas a caixa de direção, ou talvez a tomada de força, usa uma coroa e pinhão. É uma engrenagem cônica, tenente. Exatamente como esta e põe in his wrench at the shattered guts of the M1 gun. A caixa de câmbio do canhão está destruída. A carcaça, inútil. Mas a coroa, a engrenagem principal, é só aço. Os dentes estão quebrados. Mas a engrenagem do trator é do mesmo tipo. É aço, é forte, o diâmetro parece o mesmo. Eu não estou prometendo, tenente, mas é possível. The lieutenant stood frozen. He was caught between two impossibilities. The certainty of defeat by following doctrine, or the 1 in a million chance of salvation offered by his mechanic's insane gitinho. He looked at the German lines. He looked at the useless cannon. He looked back at Antunes's steady, stubborn, grease-stained face. He saw a man who believed, not in miracles, but in mechanics. He made his choice. Quanto tempo, sargento? Eu não sei. Meia hora. 1 hora. Preciso ver a peça. Você tem 30 minutos. The lieutenant snapped. The decision made. 30 minutos. E então, eu juro por Deus, Antunes, nós explodimos este canhão. Leve 2 homens. E se os alemães atirarem boca volta, e then turn to his machine gunner. Alves, fogo de supressão no ninho 2. Quero que eles fiquem de cabeça baixa. It was a distraction. Antunes grabbed his saco de lona, his heavy canvas tool bag. It clanked with the heavy, non-standard tools of a truck mechanic. Massive wrenches, a cold chisel, a pry bar, a 3-pound hammer. He grabbed 2 other men from the gun crew. Vocês dois, comigo, corram. The 200-meter dash was the longest of their lives. They ran, hunched over, from shell crater to shell crater, while their own machine gun hammered away to the left, drawing the enemy's attention. They reached the ruined farmhouse. It was a skeleton, its roof gone, its walls collapsed. And there, half buried in a mountain of rubble and dead cattle, was the tractor. It was an old Fiat 702, just as Antunes had guessed, flipped onto its side, its iron wheels pointing uselessly at the sky. It was rusted, it was dead. Aki, Antunes yelled. The part he needed, the steering gearbox, was at the front, buried in mud and debris. Ficking Giulio. He yelled at his men, who pointed their rifles at the German lines, their knuckles white. Antunes was no longer a sergeant. He was a mechanic. He plunged his arms into the cold mud and rubble, working with a frantic, desperate energy. He wasn't gentle. This was not surgery. This was demolition. He used the pry bar, jamming it into the rusted housing. He hammered at the bolts, trying to shock the rusted threads free. He was cursing in Portuguese, a steady stream of filu da, caralu, anda. A single shot, a high-velocity crack. A sniper, the bullet pinged off the tractor's engine block, 6 inches from Antunes's head. Sargento! Sargento! One of his men screamed, firing a full clip from his M1 rifle in the direction of the shot. Isto quasi lá. Antunes roared. He didn't even flinch. He gave the pry bar one final, desperate heave. With a screech of tortured, rusted metal, the gearbox housing cracked open. Antunes dropped his tools and plunged his bare hands into the thick, cold, ancient grease inside. He felt it dear. He worked his fingers around it, pulling it from its axle. He ripped it free. It up. It was a monster. a solid iron bevel gear weighing maybe 10 pounds, covered in a black, tar-like sludge. It was crude, it was agricultural, it was Italian. It was nothing like the fine, machine-tooled, high-grade American steel of the M1 gun. But Antunes looked at it, his eyes blazing. The diameter was right. The angle of the teeth was right. It would work. "Tenho!" he yelled. "I've got it!" They ran. They didn't bother with cover. They ran straight across the open ground, sniper rounds zipping past them. The heavy gear clutched in Antunes' hand like a holy relic. They tumbled back into their own position, collapsing in the mud, gasping for air. "10 minutos, Sargentu," the lieutenant yelled. Antunes ignored him. He was already at the M1 gun. "Luz, mide, luz." He crawled under the gun's carriage, lying on his back in the mud, working up into the shattered, bleeding mechanism. He cleared the broken shards of the old American gear with his hammer and chisel. Now, the moment of truth. He tried to fit the new, crude, Italian gear onto the American traversing spindle. It didn't fit. Of course it didn't fit. The central bore, the hole in the gear, was too small, by maybe 2 millimeters. It was a solid, impassable wall of iron. Now Antunes whispered, his heart sinking. "Acabou, Sargentu," the lieutenant said, his voice flat. "Peguem as cargas, get the charges." "Now?" Antunes roared, a sound so fierce the lieutenant actually flinched. "Ainda não, é só aço, eu posso consertar." "It's just steel, I can fix it." The lieutenant looked on in disbelief as Sergeant Antunes, lying in the mud, under enemy observation, with 10 minutes to live, pulled a massive, rough-cut bastard file from his canvas bag. He jammed the crude Fiat gear between his boots, braced himself, and, with a terrifying, grating shihink, S-H-H-H-H-H-I-I ink shihink, he began to hand-file the whole. He was trying to remanufacture a high-tolerance military part by hand in a ditch in the middle of a war. The sound, that was the sound that shattered the silence. Not the crack of the sniper, but the she-ink S-H-H-H-H-H-H-H-A-I ink dot. Shihink of Antunes' heartened bastard file biting into the cast iron of the Italian gear. It was a loud, grating, desperate sound. A sound that seemed to scream to every German position within a kilometer. "We are here. We are breaking metal." The lieutenant was terrified. "Quieter, Antunes. For God's sake." "I can't, Tenant." Antunes yelled back, his face already dripping with sweat, despite the mountain cold. The effort was superhuman. He was on his back in the mud, his left boot braced against the gun's axle, his right boot pinning the tractor gear against the ground, and he was filing with the fury of a man possessed. His arms and shoulders, already strong from years of changing truck tires, were burning like fire. He wasn't just filing 2 millimeters of steel. He was racing against time, against the sniper, and against the American precision engineering that made his task impossible. Crack! The German sniper fired again. The bullet hit the steel gun shield, the metallic ping ringing out like a church bell. One of the gun crew yelled, "He knows where we are." Of course he knows. Antunes roared, not stopping his filing. Shihinkes H-H-H-H-H-H-H-A-I-I ink dot. He knows we're here, but he doesn't know what I'm doing. He was in his zone, his focused world. For Antunes, the world no longer contained Germans or lieutenants or orders. It contained only one problem. This hole is too small. This pin is too big. Make it fit. The lieutenant looked at his watch. The sweat was pouring down his own face. 20 minutes had passed. 10 minutos, Sargento, he yelled. "I am not kidding. I'm hearing engines." Was it paranoia or was it real? In the mountains, sound plays tricks. A supply truck 3 valleys over could sound like a panzer on the next ridge. But the fear was real. Antunes stopped. His arms were shaking. He threw the file into the mud. "Give me the gear." He tried to fit it onto the axle. It went on a little. And it locked, jammed, solid. It still didn't fit. He let out a roar of pure frustration, an animal sound. "It's over, Sargentu," the lieutenant said, his voice flat. "Peguem as cargas. Get the charges." "No," Antunes roared, a sound so fierce the lieutenant actually flinched. "Not yet. It's close. It's steel against steel. It will go. You'll break the axle, you fool. Better to break it trying than to blow it up on purpose." Antunes shot back. He positioned the tractor gear onto the axle. It was an unholy sight. The crude, Italian, file-marked tractor part being forced to marry the smooth, high-grade American axle. "Hold the gun steady," he yelled to the crew. He raised his 3-pound hammer, his Moretta. He had no time to be subtle. This was the Gitigno in its most brutal form. It wasn't about precision, it was about willpower. He swung. A deafening clang, a sound of metal being punished, echoed across the valley. The German sniper fired again, the bullet zipping past where Antunes's head had been a second before. He swung again. Clang. The gear moved a centimeter. He swung a third time. Clang. A solid, final, seating sound. The gear was on. Was it crooked? Probably. Was it unbalanced? Absolutely. But it was on the axle. 5 minutes. The lieutenant yelled, now pale, hearing the unmistakable sound of tank treads. This time, it was not paranoia. "Give me the grease!" Antunes yelled. He had no time to close the gearbox. He grabbed a handful of black axle grease and shoved it into the open mechanism. Slathering the Italian gear and the American axle in a protective paste, he grabbed the shattered housing of the gearbox and bolted it on with 2 bolts, just enough to keep it from falling off. Prompto, a silence fell over the position. The gun crew, the lieutenant, all stared at Antunes. He rose from the ground, looking like a demon from a forge, covered in mud, black grease, and shining metal filings. He spat. He grabbed the traversing handwheel. He turned it. The wheel didn't move. It was locked. The lieutenant's heart sank. "Merda," Antunes muttered. He put his boot on the gun's trail leg, braced himself, and pulled the wheel with his entire body, his back muscles popping. And then came the sound. It was not a smooth shee of well-oiled gears. It was a screech, a wail of protest, a horrific, grinding scream of raw, badly fit, agricultural Italian iron being forced to move against high-quality American steel. It was the sound of a dying tractor, but it moved. The long, deadly 57mm barrel of the Matatank groaned, protested, and painfully swung 5 degrees to the right. Antunes reversed the wheel. Screech. The barrel swung 10 degrees to the left. It was alive. It was horrible. It was loud as hell, but it was alive. Antunes, panting, wiped the sweat and grease from his eyes. He looked at the lieutenant and gave a terrible, broken, gap-toothed, greasy grin. "Elavera, Tenon. It turns, Lieutenant." The lieutenant just stared. He looked at the gun, at the mechanic, at the destroyed tractor in the distance. He slowly raised his radio. "Battalion," he said, his voice shaking. Not with fear, but with absolute disbelief. "This is Fogo 1. Cancel the demolition order. The gun is operational." And that's when they heard it. Clear as day this time, the unmistakable sound of a Maybach engine and the clank-clank-clank of tank treads coming up the road. A Panzer IV was coming. Antunes just slapped the breech of the gun. "Q Venna. Let him come." The sound was not paranoia. The clank-clank-clank of steel treads on the rocky road grew louder, a rhythmic, pounding heartbeat of approaching doom. The lieutenant didn't wait. He was a commander again, his despair replaced with a cold, frantic energy. Gun crew, canister, no, wait, ... AP. Lots, sea, eje, a. The loader, his hand shaking, fumbled with the long, solid shot, 57mm round. He slammed it into the breech. "Pronto!" he yelled. The tank appeared. It rounded the sharp bend in the road, barely 300 meters away. A Panzer IV, gray, boxy, and arrogant. Its long 75mm cannon sniffing the air, scanning for targets. It was moving slowly, cautiously, its commander visible in the open cupola, sweeping the ridges with his binoculars. He didn't know the gun was there. He was hunting for the infantry, the soft targets. "Antunes!" the lieutenant screamed, his binoculars locked on the tank. "Travers left. Bearing ... 10 degrees left. On target. On target." This was the moment. Antunes grabbed the crude, grinding, traversing wheel. He put his boot on the gun's trail leg and threw his entire 200-pound mechanic's frame into the motion. And the sound that ripped the air, was not the sound of war. It was the sound of a barnyard accident. Isses say, ere, 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 a high-pitched, metallic shriek of raw, unlubricated, mismatched gears being forced together. It was the dying scream of the Fiat tractor, resurrected as a weapon. It was impossibly, terrifyingly loud. In the Panzer's cupola, the German commander physically flinched. He looked around, his face a mask of pure confusion. What, in God's name, was that sound? A broken truck, an animal. It was a sound that did not belong on a battlefield. He barked an order. His turret began to slowly traverse toward the sound, toward the gun position. But the turret was electric, smooth, and slow on target. The Brazilian gunner yelled, his eye pressed to the sight. He had it. The lieutenant didn't hesitate. Fogo! The 57mm cannon barked. A single, sharp crack that was almost a relief after the grinding shriek. The gun kicked back, the carriage groaning in protest, but it held. The shell was gone. 300 meters is a short flight. The crew didn't even have time to blink. They saw the red tracer, and then the smack. It was not a Hollywood explosion. It was a hard, solid, brutal thud. A metallic punch. The armor-piercing round, traveling at over 2,800 feet per second, struck the Panzer IV's frontal plate right on the driver's side. It was a perfect, penetrating hit. The tank lurched, as if punched by a giant. It stopped, dead. The Maybach engine, still running, sputtered and died. The long 75mm cannon, halfway traversed, froze in place. For a single, long second, nothing happened. The tank was just a statue. And then, a thin, black wisp of smoke curled out of the impact hole. A second later, a bright orange gout of flame erupted from the commander's open hatch, followed by a thick, oily, black cloud. The secondary explosion was muffled deep inside the tank as the ammunition cooked off. The tank was dead, a flaming 25-ton coffin, completely blocking the narrow mountain road. Silence. The only sound was the tink of the burning tank's hot metal cooling in the mountain air, and the distant, fading echo of the gunshot. The lieutenant slowly lowered his binoculars. His entire body was shaking. He looked at the smoking wreck. He looked at his men, their faces white, frozen in disbelief. He looked at Sergeant Antunes. Antunes wasn't looking at the lieutenant. He wasn't looking at the tank. He was on his knees, his hand resting gently on the traversing mechanism of the M1 gun, as if calming an animal after a hard run. He ran his fingers over the crude, hot, Italian gear he had hammered into place. He grinned, his face a mask of grease, sweat, and triumph. He spat on the ground. "Ella aguantó, tenente," he said, panting. "It held the lieutenant. The platoon was saved. The crossroads was held." The German counterattack was stopped before it began, not by a perfect weapon, but by a broken one, held together by scrap iron, willpower, and the purest form of Brazilian ingenio. The silence that fell over the crossroads was profound. The only sound was the tink ... tink of the burning Panzer's hot metal cooling in the mountain air, and the distant, fading echo of the gunshot. The lieutenant slowly lowered his binoculars. His entire body was shaking. He looked at the smoking wreck, a perfect, black tombstone completely blocking the narrow road. He looked at his men, their faces white, frozen in disbelief. He looked at Sergeant Antunes. Antunes wasn't looking at the lieutenant. He wasn't looking at the tank. He was on his knees, his hand resting gently on the traversing mechanism of the M1 gun, as if calming an animal after a hard run. He ran his fingers over the crude, hot file-marked Italian gear he had hammered into place. He grinned, his face a mask of grease, sweat, and triumph. He spat on the ground. "Ella aguantó, tenente," he said, panting. "It held, Lieutenant." This was the hack. The Italian tractor hack. It was ugly. It was brutal. It was loud. And it had just saved an entire platoon. It had held the crossroads. It had stopped a German counterattack cold. But the story of this impossible repair job would never be told. Why? Because it was, by its very nature, unreportable. How could the lieutenant possibly write this in his after-action report? At 1400 hours, Sergeant Antunes did ... something. with a hammer and a file, the gun made a sound like a dying pig, and then it worked. How could Antunes himself explain it? Well, sir, I violated protocol, disobeyed a direct order to plant demolition charges, stole enemy property, and then used a 3-pound hammer to force a piece of agricultural scrap iron into a high-tolerance American weapon system. They wouldn't have given him a medal. They would have given him a court-martial. The hack was a violation of every rule. It was an embarrassment to the Ordnance Corps. It proved that a single, stubborn mechanic with a bastard file was more effective than the entire Allied Reich echelon supply chain. And you do not put that in writing. So, the official report would be simple, clean, and a lie. At 14:10 hours, enemy armor was engaged and destroyed at 300 meters. Position held, the how would be erased. The unbelievable, grinding, shrieking sound of that gear would be forgotten by everyone, except the men who were there. The hack became a ghost, a secret handshake between the members of that gun crew who knew their lives had been saved by a dead tractor and a madman with a hammer. And what of the gun? It probably didn't fire again. That Jitinho repair was a one-shot miracle. The impossible stress of the shot, combined with the mismatched parts, likely shattered the gear or warped the axle for good. It had done its job once. Antunes probably just shrugged. Agora sim tenant. Está morta. Now, yes, Lieutenant, it's dead. And tease, timed, they would have planted the charges and destroyed it. Its final, glorious act of defiance complete. When the war ended, Sergeant Antunes, the mechanic, the Fucador, went home. He sailed back to Brazil, was discharged, and disappeared back into the anonymous, bustling suburbs of São Paulo. He didn't write a book. He didn't talk to historians. He just went back to his oficina, his garage. He went back to fixing He lived a long life, his hands permanently stained with the black grease of 1,000 broken engines. His neighbors knew him as Su Antunes, the best mechanic in the district, the only man who could make an old, broken-down truck run again. His children and grandchildren would watch him, amazed, as he used a hammer and a piece of wire to fix a transmission or brought a dead engine to life with a Wayland slap. They would ask him, "Vova, how do you know how to fix these things?" And Antunes would wipe his hands on a rag, light a cigarette, and smile that same greasy, gap-toothed, triumphant grin. "Meu filho, rid-se. Você não vai acreditar. É uma longa história. Começou na Itália." Com trator, his family would laugh, thinking it was just another one of his tall tales. They couldn't know that, for one desperate, impossible hour in the mountains of Italy, this old man had gone to war against physics, against doctrine, and against a panzer, armed with nothing but a hammer, a file, and a piece of scrap iron. He was a man who understood, better than any general, that a machine has a soul. And sometimes, you just have to beat a new one into it.